Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Before continuing on with Venerable Ñāṇamoli's Life of the Buddha, I'm going to read something from Bhikkhu Bodhi's In the Buddha's Words. And this is the introduction to part 2, or chapter 2, Bringer of Light. This is page 43. The picture of the human condition that emerges from the Nikayas, as sketched in the preceding chapter, is the background against which the manifestation of the Buddha in the world acquires a heightened and deepened significance. Unless we view the Buddha against this multi-dimensional background, extending from the most personal and individual exigencies of the present to the vast impersonal rhythms of cosmic time, any interpretation we may arrive at about his role is bound to be incomplete. Far from capturing the viewpoint of the compilers of the Nikayas, our interpretation will be influenced as much by our own presuppositions as by theirs, perhaps even more so. Depending on our own biases and predispositions, we may choose to regard the Buddha as a liberal ethical reformer of a degenerate Brahmanism, as a great secular humanist, as a radical empiricist, as an existential psychologist, as the proponent of a sweeping agnosticism, or as the precursor of any other intellectual fashion that meets our fancy. The Buddha who stares back at us from the texts will be too much a reflection of ourselves, too little an image of the Enlightened One. Perhaps in interpreting a body of ancient religious literature, we can never fully avoid inserting ourselves and our own values into the subject we are interpreting. However, though we may never achieve perfect transparency, we can limit the impact of personal bias upon the process of interpretation by giving the words of the text due respect. When we pay this act of homage to the Nikayas, when we take seriously their own account of the background to the Buddha's manifestation in the world, we will see that they ascribe to his mission nothing short of cosmic scope. Against the background of a universe with no conceivable bounds in time, a universe within which living beings enveloped in the darkness of ignorance wander along bound to the suffering of old age, sickness, and death, the Buddha arrives as the torch-bearer of humankind, Ukadtaro Manusanang, bringing the light of wisdom. His arising in the world is the manifestation of great vision, of great light, of great radiance. Having discovered for himself the perfect peace of liberation, he kindles for us the light of knowledge, which reveals both the truths that we must see for ourselves and the path of practice that culminates in this liberating vision. According to Buddhist tradition, the Buddha Gautama is not merely one unique individual who puts in an unprecedented appearance on the stage of human history and then bows out forever. He is, rather, the fulfillment of a primordial archetype, the most recent member of a cosmic dynasty of Buddhas constituted by numberless perfectly enlightened ones of the past and sustained by perfectly enlightened ones continuing indefinitely onward into the future. Early Buddhism, even in the archaic root texts of the Nikayas, already recognizes a plurality of Buddhas who all conform to certain fixed patterns of behavior, the broad outlines of which are described in the opening sections of the Mahapadana Sutta, Digha Nikaya 14. The word Tathagata, which the texts use as an epithet for a Buddha, point to this fulfillment of a primordial archetype. The word means both the one who has come thus, Tatha Agata, that is, one who has come into our midst in the same way that the Buddhas of the past have come, and the one who has gone thus, Tathagata. That is, one who has gone to the ultimate peace, nibbana, in the same way that the Buddhas of the past have gone. Though the Nikayas stipulate that in any given world system, at any given time, only one perfectly enlightened Buddha can arise, the arising of Buddhas is intrinsic to the cosmic process. Like a meteor against the blackness of the night sky, from time to time a Buddha will appear against the backdrop of boundless space and time, lighting up the spiritual firmament of the world, shedding the brilliance of his wisdom upon those capable of seeing the truths that he illuminates. The being who is to become the Buddha is called in Pali a bodhisattva, a word better known in the Sanskrit form, bodhisattva. According to common Buddhist tradition, a bodhisattva is one who undertakes a long course of spiritual development, consciously motivated by the aspiration to attain future Buddhahood. Inspired and sustained by great compassion for living beings mired in the suffering of birth and death, a bodhisattva fulfills, over many aeons of cosmic time, the difficult course needed to fully master the requisites for supreme enlightenment. When all these requisites are complete, he attains Buddhahood in order to establish the Dhamma in the world. A Buddha discovers the long-lost path to liberation, the ancient path traveled by the Buddhas of the past that culminates in the boundless freedom of Nibbana. Having found the path and traveled it to its end, he then teaches it in all its fullness to humanity so that many others can enter the way to final liberation. This, however, does not exhaust the function of a Buddha. A Buddha understands and teaches not only the path leading to the supreme state of ultimate liberation, the perfect bliss of Nibbana, but also the paths leading to the various types of wholesome, mundane happiness to which human beings aspire. A Buddha proclaims both a path of mundane enhancement that enables sentient beings to plant wholesome roots productive of happiness, peace, and security in the worldly dimensions of their lives, and a path of world transcendence to guide sentient beings to Nibbana. His role is thus much wider than an exclusive focus on the transcendent aspects of his teaching might suggest. He is not merely a mentor of ascetics and contemplatives, not merely a teacher of meditation techniques and philosophical insights, but a guide to the Dhamma in its full range and depth, one who reveals, proclaims, and establishes all the principles integral to correct understanding and wholesome conduct, whether mundane or transcendental. The text highlights this wide-ranging, altruistic dimension of a Buddha's career when it praises the Buddha as the one person who arises in the world, quote, for the welfare of the multitude, for the happiness of the multitude, out of compassion for the world, for the good, welfare, and happiness of devas and humans, unquote. The Nikayas offer two perspectives on the Buddha as a person, and to do justice to the text, it is important to hold these two perspectives into balance, without letting one cancel out the other. A correct view of the Buddha can only arise from the merging of these two perspectives, just as the correct view of an object can arise only when the perspectives presented by our two eyes are merged in the brain into a single image. One perspective, the one highlighted most often in modernist presentations of Buddhism, shows the Buddha as a human being who, like other human beings, had to struggle with the common frailties of human nature to arrive at the state of an enlightened one. After his enlightenment at the age of 35, he walked among us for 45 years as a wise and compassionate human teacher, sharing his realization with others and ensuring that his teachings would remain in the world long after his death. This is the side of the Buddha's nature that figures most prominently in the Nikayas. Since it corresponds closely with contemporary agnostic attitudes toward the ideals of religious faith, it has an immediate appeal to those nurtured by modern modes of thought. The other aspect of the Buddha's person is likely to seem strange to us, but it looms large in Buddhist tradition and serves as the bedrock for popular Buddhist devotion. Though secondary in the Nikayas, it occasionally surfaces so conspicuously that it cannot be ignored, despite the efforts of Buddhist modernists to downplay its significance or rationalize its intrusions. From this perspective, the Buddha is seen as one who had already made preparations for his supreme attainment over countless past lives and was destined from birth to fulfill the mission of a world teacher. The future Buddha descends in the text, the future Buddha descends fully conscious from the Tusita heaven into his mother's womb. His conception and birth are accompanied by wonders. Deities worship the newborn infant, and as soon as he is born, he walks 7 steps and announces his future destiny. Obviously, for the compilers of such a sutta as this, the Buddha was already destined to attain Buddhahood even prior to his conception, and thus his struggle for enlightenment was a battle whose outcome was already predetermined. The final paragraph of the sutta, however, ironically harkens back to the realistic picture of the Buddha. What the Buddha himself considers to be truly wondrous are not the miracles accompanying his conception and birth, but his mindfulness and clear comprehension in the midst of feelings, thoughts, and perceptions. The 3 texts in this section are biographical accounts consistent with this naturalistic point of view. They offer us a portrait of the Buddha stark in its realism, bare in its naturalism, striking in its ability to convey deep psychological insights with minimal descriptive technique. We read about his renunciation, his training under 2 famous meditation teachers, his disillusionment with their teachings, his solitary struggle, and his triumphant realization of the deathless. Another text fills in the gaps of the above narrative with a detailed account of the Bodhisattva's practice of self-mortification, strangely missing from previous discourses. This text also gives us the classic description of the enlightenment experience as involving the attainment of the 4 jhanas, states of deep meditation, followed by the 3 vijas, or higher types of knowledge: the knowledge of the recollection of past lives, the knowledge of the passing away and rebirth of beings, and the knowledge of the destruction of the taints. While this text may convey the impression that the last knowledge broke upon the Buddha's mind as a sudden and spontaneous intuition, this impression is with an account of the Bodhisattva on the eve of his enlightenment, reflecting deeply upon the suffering of old age and death. He then methodically traces this suffering back to its conditions by a process that involves, at each step, careful attention, yoniso manasikara, leading to a breakthrough by wisdom, panyaya abhisamaya. This process of investigation culminates in the discovery of dependent origination, which thereby becomes the philosophical cornerstone of his teaching. It is important to emphasize that, as presented here and elsewhere in the Nikayas, dependent origination does not signify a joyous celebration of the interconnectedness of all things, but a precise articulation of the conditional pattern in dependence upon which suffering arises and ceases. In the same text, the Buddha declares that he discovered the path to enlightenment only when he found the way to bring dependent origination to an end. It was thus the realization of the cessation of dependent origination, and not merely the discovering of its origination aspect, that precipitated the Buddha's enlightenment. The simile of the ancient city, introduced later in the discourse, illustrates the point that the Buddha's enlightenment was not a unique event, but the rediscovery of the same ancient path that had been followed by the Buddhas of the past. Later on, we rejoin the Buddha immediately after his enlightenment, as he ponders the weighty question whether to attempt to share his realization with the world. Just at this point, in the midst of a text that has so far appeared so convincingly naturalistic, a deity named Brahma Sahampati descends from the heavens to plead with the Buddha to wander forth and teach the Dhamma for the benefit of those with little dust in their eyes. Should this scene be interpreted literally or as a symbolic enactment of an internal drama taking place in the Buddha's mind? It is hard to give a definitive answer to this question. Perhaps the scene could be understood as occurring at both levels at once. In any event, Brahma's appearance at this point marks a shift from the realism that colors the earlier part of this sutta back toward the mythical symbolic mode. The transition again underscores the cosmic significance of the Buddha's enlightenment and his future mission as a teacher. Brahma's appeal eventually prevails, and the Buddha agrees to teach. He chooses as the first recipients of his teaching the 5 ascetics who had attended on him during his years of ascetic practices. The narrative culminates in a brief statement that the Buddha instructed them in such a way that they all attained the deathless nibbana for themselves. However, it gives no indication of the specific teaching that the Buddha imparted to them when he first met them after his enlightenment. That teaching is the first discourse itself, known as the setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. This sutta is included in the text. When the sutta opens, the Buddha announces to the 5 ascetics that he has discovered the middle way, which he identifies with the Noble Eightfold Path. In the light of the preceding biographical account, we can understand why the Buddha should begin his discourse in this way. The 5 ascetics had initially refused to acknowledge the Buddha's claim to enlightenment and spurned him as one who had betrayed the higher calling and reverted to a life of luxury. Thus, he first had to assure them that, far from reverting to a life of self-indulgence, he had discovered a new approach to the timeless quest for enlightenment. This new approach, he told them, remains faithful to the renunciation of sensual pleasures, yet eschews tormenting the body as pointless and unproductive. He then explained to them the true path to liberation, the Noble Eightfold Path, which avoids the 2 extremes and thereby gives rise to the light of wisdom and culminates in the destruction of all bondage, nibbana. Once he has cleared up their misunderstanding, the Buddha then proclaims the truths he had realized on the night of his enlightenment. These are the 4 noble truths. Not only does he enunciate each truth and briefly define its meaning, but he describes each truth from 3 perspectives. These constitute the 3 turnings of the wheel of Dhamma referred to later in the discourse. With respect to each truth, the first turning is the wisdom that illuminates the particular nature of that noble truth. The second turning is the understanding that each noble truth imposes a particular task to be accomplished. Thus, the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, is to be fully understood. The second noble truth, the truth of suffering's origin or craving, is to be abandoned. The third truth, the truth of the cessation of suffering, is to be realized. And the fourth truth, the truth of the path, is to be developed. The third turning is the understanding that the 4 functions regard the 4 noble truths have been completed, that the truth of suffering has been fully understood, craving has been abandoned, cessation of suffering has been realized, and the path has been fully developed. It was only when he understood the 4 noble truths that in these 3 turnings and 12 modes, he says, that he could claim that he had attained unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta illustrates once again the blending of the 2 stylistic modes I referred to earlier. The discourse proceeds almost entirely in the realistic naturalistic mode until we approach the end. When the Buddha completes his sermon, the cosmic significance of the event is illuminated by a passage showing how the deities in each successive celestial realm applaud the discourse and shout the good news up to the deities in the next higher realm. At the same time, the entire world system quakes and shakes, and a great light surpassing the radiance of the gods appears in the world. Then at the very end, we return from this glorious scene back to the prosaic human realm to behold the Buddha briefly congratulating the ascetic Kondanya for gaining the dust-free, stainless vision of the Dhamma. In one split second, the lamp of the doctrine has passed from master to disciple to begin its journey throughout India and across the world. And before I continue with this narrative of the life of the Buddha, that there's another interesting connection in the commentaries and in the Thai Buddha Prawat, the Buddha's biography in Thai, how they teach it is that Anya Kondanya, the first Sotapanna, the first Aryan disciple of the Buddha, he's actually, it harkens back to the time of the birth of the Buddha, when there was all these different ascetics and Brahmins who came to make predictions about the child. And this is according to the commentaries and the legends. And that all of these different ascetics, they put up 2 fingers, which meant if he's a householder, he'll be a real wheel-turning monarch, and if he leaves the home life, he'll be a Buddha, and that there's those 2 possibilities. And then the very youngest of those ascetics and Brahmins is named Kondanya, and he puts up 1 finger, which means he'll definitely be a Buddha, and then that's the same Kondanya who then leads these 5 ascetics and becomes the first Sotapanna later on after the awakening. So we ended with the Buddha deciding to honor, respect, and revere the Dhamma, and putting it above himself. Now, while the Blessed One was alone in retreat, this thought arose in him. This Dhamma that I have attained is profound and hard to see, hard to discover. It is the most peaceful and superior goal of all, not attainable by mere rationalization, subtle for the wise to experience. But this generation relies on attachment, relishes attachment, delights in attachment. It is hard for such a generation to see this truth, that is to say, specific conditionality, dependent origination. And it is hard to see this truth, that is to say, the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of the essentials of existence, the exhaustion of craving, the fading of lust, cessation, nibbana. And if I taught the Dhamma, others would not understand me, and that would be wearying and troublesome for me. Thereupon there came to him spontaneously these stanzas never heard before. Enough of teaching the Dhamma that even I found hard to reach, for it will never be perceived by those that live in lust and hate. People died in lust, and whom a cloud of darkness laps will never see what goes against the stream, is subtle, deep, and hard to see, abstruse. Considering this, his mind favored inaction and not teaching the Dhamma. Then it occurred to the Brahma Sahampati, who became aware in his mind of the thought in the Blessed One's mind, the world will be lost, the world will be utterly lost, for the mind of the Perfect One, accomplished and fully enlightened, favors inaction and not teaching the Dhamma. Then, as soon as a strong man might extend his flexed arm or flex his extended arm, Brahma Sahampati vanished from the Brahma world and appeared before the Blessed One. He arranged his robe on one shoulder, and putting his right knee to the ground and raising his hands palm together toward the Blessed One, he said, Lord, let the Blessed One teach the Dhamma. Let the Sublime One teach the Dhamma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dhamma. Some of them will gain final knowledge of the Dhamma. When Brahma Sahampati had said this, he said further, in Magadha there has appeared till now impure Dhamma, thought out by men still stained. Open the deathless gateway, let them hear the Dhamma the Immaculate has found. Ascend, O sage, the tower of the Dhamma, and just as one sees all the folk around who stand upon a solid pile of rock, survey, O sorrowless, all-seeing sage, this human breed engulfed in sorrowing, that birth has at its mercy and old age. Arise, O hero, victor, knowledge bringer, free from all debt and wander in the world. Proclaim the Dhamma, for some, Blessed One, will understand. The Blessed One listened to Brahma Sahampati's pleading. Out of compassion for beings, he surveyed the world with the eye of a Buddha. Just as in a pond of blue, red, or white lotuses, some lotuses that are born and grow in the water thrive immersed in the water without coming out of it, and some other lotuses that are born and grow in the water rest on the water's surface, and some other lotuses that are born and grow in the water come right up out of the water and stand clear, unwetted by it. So too he saw beings with little dust in their eyes and with much dust on their eyes, with keen faculties and dull faculties, with good qualities and bad qualities, easy to teach and hard to teach, and some who dwelt seeing fear in the other world and blame as well. When he had seen this, he replied, "Wide open are the portals of the deathless. Let those who hear show faith. If I was minded to tell not the sublime Dhamma I know, it was that I saw vexation in the telling." Then Brahma Sahambati thought, "I have made it possible for the Dhamma to be taught by the Blessed One." And after he had paid homage to him, keeping him on his right, he vanished at once. The Blessed One thought, "To whom shall I first teach the Dhamma? Who will soon understand this Dhamma?" Then he thought, "Alara Kalama is wise, learned, and discerning. He has had little dust on his eyes for a long time. Suppose I taught the Dhamma first to him. He will soon understand it." Then invisible deities told the Blessed One, "Lord, Alara Kalama died 7 days ago." And the knowledge and vision arose in him. Alara Kalama died 7 days ago. He thought, Alara Kalama's loss is a great one. If he had heard this Dhamma, he would soon have understood it. The Blessed One thought, Uddaka Ramaputta is wise, learned, and discerning. He has had little dust on his eyes for a long time. Suppose I taught the Dhamma first to him. He will soon understand it. Then invisible deities told the Blessed One, Lord, Uddaka Ramaputta died last night, and the knowledge and vision arose in him. Uddaka Ramaputta died last night. He thought, Uddaka Ramaputta's loss is a great one. If he had heard this Dhamma, he would soon have understood it. The Blessed One thought, to whom shall I first teach the Dhamma? Who will soon understand this Dhamma? Then he thought, the bhikkhus of the group of 5 who attended me while I was engaged in my struggle were very helpful. Suppose I taught the Dhamma first to them. Then he thought, where are the bhikkhus of the group of 5 living now? And with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, he saw that they were living at Benares in the deer park at Isipatana, the resort of the seers. The Blessed One stayed on at Uruvela as long as he chose, and then he set out to go by stages to Benares. Between the place of enlightenment and Gaya, the monk Upaka saw him on the road. He said, your faculties are serene, friend. The color of your skin is clear and bright. Under whom have you gone forth? Who is your teacher? Or whose Dhamma do you confess? When this was said, the Blessed One addressed the monk Upaka in stanzas. I am an all-transcender and all-knower, unsullied by all things, renouncing all, by cravings ceasing freed. And this I owe to my own wisdom. To whom should I concede it? I have no teacher, and my like exists nowhere in all the world, with all its gods, because I have no person for my counterpart. I am the teacher in the world without a peer, accomplished, and I alone am quite enlightened, quenched, whose fires are all extinct. I go to Kasi's city now to set the wheel of Dhamma in motion. In a blinded world, I go to beat the deathless drum. By your claims, friend, you are a universal victor. The victors like me, Upaka, are those whose taints are quite exhausted. I have vanquished all states of evil. It is for that I am a victor. When this was said, the monk Upaka remarked, may it be so, friend, shaking his head, took a sidetrack and departed. It's kind of like what we were talking about yesterday before the meal. It's kind of like, okay, who is this guy? I'm gonna go the other direction. Then, wandering by stages, the Blessed One came at length to Benares, to the deer park at Isipatana, where the bhikkhus of the group of 5 were. They saw him coming in the distance. Then they agreed among themselves, "Friends, here comes the monk Gotama, who became self-indulgent, gave up the struggle and reverted to luxury. We ought not to pay homage to him, or rise up for him, or receive his bowl and outer robe. Still, a seat can be prepared. Let him sit down if he likes." But as soon as the Blessed One approached, they found themselves unable to keep their pact. One went to meet him and took his bowl and outer robe. Another prepared a seat. Another set out water, footstool, and towel. The Blessed One sat down on the seat prepared and washed his feet. They addressed him by name and as friend. When this was said, he told them, "Bhikkhus, do not address the Perfect One by name and as friend. The Perfect One is accomplished and fully enlightened. Listen, bhikkhus, the deathless has been attained. I shall instruct you. I shall teach you the Dhamma. By practicing as you are instructed, you will, by realizing it for yourselves here and now through direct knowledge, enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the house life into homelessness." Then the bhikkhus of the group of 5 said, "Friend Gotama, even with the hardship, privation, and mortification that you practiced, you achieved no distinction higher than the human state, worthy of the Noble One's knowledge and vision. Since you are now self-indulgent and have given up the struggle and reverted to luxury, how will you have achieved any such distinction?" Then the Blessed One told the bhikkhus of the group of 5, "The Perfect One is not self-indulgent. He has not given up the struggle. He has not reverted to luxury. The Perfect One is accomplished and fully enlightened. Listen, bhikkhus, the deathless has been attained. I shall instruct you. I shall teach you the Dhamma. By practicing as you are instructed, you will, by realizing it yourselves here and now through direct knowledge, enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the house life into homelessness." A second time, the bhikkhus of the group of 5 said the same thing to him, and a second time he gave them the same answer. A third time they said the same thing. When this was said, he asked them, "Bhikkhus, have you ever known me to speak like this before?" "No, Lord." So there's that change there. They now no longer call him friend. They call him Lord. "The Perfect One is accomplished and fully enlightened. Listen, bhikkhus, the deathless has been attained. I shall instruct you. I shall teach you the Dhamma. By practicing as you are instructed, you will, by realizing it yourselves, here and now, through direct knowledge, enter upon and dwell in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which the clansmen rightly go forth from the house life into homelessness." The Blessed One was able to convince them. They heard the Blessed One. They listened and opened their hearts to knowledge. And I'll end it there for this morning. A few minutes if there's any questions.
I remember Ajahn giving a Dhamma talk one time and pointing out something about that story that I never really understood precisely, or he shown a new light on, and that is that basically the power of that Satya Bharani there, where they were unconvinced, the ascetics, but then it was actually the power of the Buddha's Satya Bharani that enabled them to receive the teaching. And so he was pointing out that, like, you know, even in a mundane sense, if you cultivate trust with people, then, you know, that's very powerful and it opens doors in ways that may not seem obvious initially. And I felt that was it was a very good, very helpful reflection for me.
Yeah, the Buddha's Satyavarani shining through there with the 5 ascetics. Have you ever heard me talk about that before? And they know he's not just going to make an empty claim of knowledge and vision.
Doesn't that same Brahmin that he initially meets come back at the very end of his life as well and take the going forward?
That's a different one. That's the Brahmin Dona, who he actually meets at some undisclosed point after this. But the monk Upaka is the one who is like, "May it be so, friend," and just like walks away shaking his head. Although I don't know if he appears again too. He might be the one in the Pilgrim Caminita or something. But that's more like legends.
Yeah, it's more in the legend form. Yeah, I don't believe Upaka ever shows up again.
Brahma sees his foot and he wants to wed him to his daughter. Is that a different Brahma?
That's the sutta is that. I can't remember which sutta that is. But there's the Brahmin father sees the footprints, and it's either the father or the mother says, "These are the footprints of someone who's fit to wed our daughter," and you can tell by the way that the Buddha is stepping that they're drawn to him. I can't remember. Anybody else can remember where that sutta comes from?
Might be Isipatana.
Isipatana. That sounds. Could even be the Isipatana commentary.
Yeah, because I do remember Brahma offering, men and wife offering their daughter to the Buddha in Isipatana, and the Buddha replies very strongly.
And then she gets upset, and he doesn't accept her, then the daughter gets upset.